Hello, I'm Craig Constantine. Welcome. This is the Podcaster Community Show, short conversations that are not just about podcasting because I like to take the scenic route. My guest today is Mark Tweddle. Welcome, Mark. How are you?
I'm good. Welcome. Welcome to you too. It's great to see you.
It gets interesting
Welcome
when
to
it's
your own podcast.
double-ended virtual. It's like, I don't know, you're not at my place. I'm at your place. Who's welcoming who? Yeah, as with every conversation, watching the clock tick, I'm always, there's so many things I want to pull on. Let's start talking about work. And I mean like the work of creating podcasts. So we were talking before, and I think you made some great points about let's say, the pressures that are now being put onto, I'm going to say, the engineering department of audio podcasting lands. I think you made a
Yeah.
great point about how engineers, the people, in the headphones, in a sound booth, editing audio, are sort of being drug kicking and screaming into the internet. I always say drug into the 20th century, which is not the current one, drug into the 20th century to learn how to use these tools. And maybe if you could, can you share with me the story that you kind of highlighted when we were talking before about how you mix together, like, what I'm going to call real audio engineering skills of one person with a team on your wife's podcast show?
Yeah, my wife's podcast is it's actually the names of the three hosts, which is unusual in itself. There's three of them. So Ferguson, Harrington, Hawks. And the challenge of that was because there's three of them plus a guest. So when it became how do we edit that, it was all put on to Neil Harrington, who has this wonderful audio production company, Source Productions. That's SAUCE, and he was struggling as how do they collaborate, because he lives in the world where he's the guy with the headphones and the and doing all that kind of technical work, whereas me, I'm not the purist. So I'd been using this thing called Descript, which gives you a transcription, a kind of rough transcription, especially when you've got a Scottish accent, a very rough transcription. And then you edit the transcription, and then that directly sorts out the audio. So Neil was not interested in that at all. But where it became really key was Descript's ability to publish a page on the internet with that transcription and audio so that everybody could comment on it. And then that allowed them to collaborate together. Initially, he was kind of skeptical about it, but what it gave him was, my wife is a brilliant editor as far as story. Like my wife and I, that's what we work in. We work in to do using storytelling for coaching and for team building. And so she would be able to look at how the episode flowed, decide quickly what needed to get removed, just highlight it on this page. He'd get all the time codes. He just then had to follow the notes. And then they brought in Chesney as well, because he does the music. He does this weird thing with music where the guest gets to choose a song that affects them emotionally, and then he'll do a cover for it. So he's doing a cover song for every episode.
Oh.
And it gets them out of a lot of the kind of licensing issues as well. That's initially why they did it. But it creates an incredible intimacy. But then it means that he can, if there's something that maybe he said that he doesn't want to go further than the people who were having that chat, then he can get rid of that as well, and just they collaborate together. And then Neil found it so useful, he now uses it with his real clients. He's got for adverts and other professional podcasts that he does for other companies.
So I don't know if I'm sure that's what Descript was intending that was for, but I have always, so I don't personally use Descript. I've seen it, I've been inside of it, but it's not a tool that I'm using. But everybody that I've heard describe it so far, and this is just the gang of podcasters that I'm running with, everybody that I've heard so far has always used it as, I'm going to say, a power tool for their own use. And like, power tools are great until like you slip off the screw head and like hit yourself in the leg with the screwdriver. You can do a lot of damage with power tools. And I think it's a wonderful point, or a wonderful story that you're sharing about maybe this tool that I know I have had pigeonholed in my head as power tool for me to manage audio. Maybe there are other tools that we're misusing is the wrong word, but can you think of any other places where in podcast space, maybe we're using the wrong tool for the job, or we should try picking up a different tool?
Well, actually, in that one, we also discovered a thing where one of the guests, everybody was so enthralled with the conversation, they didn't notice that he did an awful lot of, he touched his microphone and stuff. And so they
Mm,
had all this sort of
yeah,
additional noise that was to be gotten rid of. And Neil was distraught with it because, it was the best conversation. He really wanted it, and annoyed with himself that he hadn't noticed while they were listening because he was so enthralled with the conversation. And all the tools that he had, there was none that he could just flick a button and get rid of this stuff. He was having to get rid of every click, every whatever, and deal with them individually. And it was just too much for what is essentially a non-paid gig.
right.
And what I did was put it through Descript's studio sound, and it cleaned up most of it
Please
in like,
fix button, right?
yeah, done. And that was it, gone.
Apply
And
magic.
he was amazed at that one as well. He was like, I think that's what made it easier to actually get him to do the collaboration side of it. He then started to see there was something else in this, because he couldn't get in his head was he struggled in his head with the fact that he'd spent thousands and thousands of pounds, because he's in the UK, on tools to fix audio and makes everything sound the way he wants to fix it. So how could this $15 a month tool
Mm.
fix it for you?
Yeah, I mean, tooling, right there. There's a proverb or an old adage about, you can tell how good a workman is by how good his tools, like how he treats his tools. Not necessarily does he have the most expensive set, but does he treat his tools respectfully? Although my father, who was a professional mechanic on elevators for his entire career, used to tell a story about a guy that, like an old grizzled elevator mechanic when my father was a greenhorn. And my father shows up, elevator mechanics bring their own tools. So my father has all these shiny new tools, and this guy basically has like a bag of junk. And when he gets to the job, he literally just upended his tool bag on the floor and then started picking through stuff. And he's got like bent screwdrivers. It's just like total. I mean, it's junk. And my dad says to this guy, like, how are you supposed to? And this old guy looks at my dad, he's probably smoking a cigarette too at the time, looks at my dad and says, anybody can fix it with the right tools. It takes a real mechanic to fix it with a peach basket full of shit.
Oh
I was
man,
like,
make it
okay, so
difficult for you.
yeah, so you can spot a good, craftsman by how he treats his tools, but there's also something to be said for skill. But I'm off on a tangent. What I was thinking was,
You know what it
yes,
makes me think of is my friend
mm,
Dave, who when he was living with his own parents had his toolbox because he was working on a car and stuff, and he actually had a padlock on it that he wouldn't give his father the key for, because he knew that
doubts,
his father's the kind of guy that would stir paint with an adjustable wrench,
right? Yeah, the
and
end
wonder
that you
what's the
use,
problem.
not the handle, right? I put the good
Yeah.
end in this. Oh God. But when you mentioned thousands of dollars of tooling, my thought ran to, I purchased the the pro version of Hindenburg, which is not thousands of
Mm,
dollars, but it's like hundreds of bucks. And at the time, I kind of hovered over the buy button because I thought, "Ugh." But when I bought the tool and actually spent some time learning to use it, I don't use it most of the time. But every once in a while, something weird happens, and like the knowledge that I have far outweighs the money that I spent on the tool. So what I'm thinking is it Ferguson? I don't know if that's his first name or his last name, but
yeah,
Ferguson's
Lynch.
skill set is probably like way more valuable, certainly to you guys, way more valuable than the tool. So it's just that whole like sunk cost. Like, yeah, to get these skills, I had to learn.
Oh, absolutely,
When I was a
Neil,
kid,
and
we had
it's
$4,000 pro
and it's
tools.
Neil. Yeah, it's Neil Harrington, and yeah, his skill set and his understanding of audio. Like they just did 3 live recordings in front of an audience at the
Mm,
Edinburgh Festival, and so that sort of skill set is what comes in. And he prior to doing the audio stuff, he was a DJ, so he just has that full body of
yeah,
knowledge around audio. That's
steeped in that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And the same goes for Chesney Hawkes, who's a kind of UK pop star. He his ability to do covers of a ridiculously broad range of music
Mm.
is out of this world. I mean, one guest obviously didn't realize what they were asking, wanted him to do Bjork. Uh, you've got you. He did it. He managed it. He pulled it off. I was just amazed. That stuff has been quite illuminating as to how that works. And when they prepared, this might be useful for other people when you get that, because it's a big step to go from what we're doing right now, which is using Zencaster and seeing each other over online, to actually sitting with an audience and running a show for an hour. And part of the preparation that these guys did was they decided they would run these Zoom calls and record 3 episodes as if they were live, so that you could get the structure and the flow,
That's
including Chesney playing a song live.
Dress rehearsals,
so they did that, and they did that with each of their partners. So I did it as a guest, and then Chesney's wife, and then Neil's wife did it. And that was really interesting, watching that and watching the panic in their eyes as they're trying to deal with the time, trying to deal with all that stuff. I'm waiting for my wife actually comes back on Thursday, so I kind of want a full debrief as to how that worked when the audience was there. Did it just, the time just disappear and the whole thing just happened, or what was that experience? Because I have no idea what that would be like. And the one who was most scared of it in a way was Neil, because he's an audio guy. Chesney's used to standing up in front of large audiences.
The show must go on, right?
Yeah. My wife, Len Ferguson, she's very used to being. She's a stand-up comedian, does all sorts of performance type stuff, and she's been doing a play all about storytelling, for the period after that. So that wasn't the problem either. It was just, for him, like, where's my part? What do I do? What do I provide? Because I'm normally with the making sure everything's recorded. How do I deal with that? And that was all misplaced as well. That's the other thing that I would say is completely misplaced, because he's the guy that always does the research. He always does the pre-planning and the understanding who is the guest, what are the big areas that we might want to look into. Pre-planning, not. Am I going to say this on my podcast? Pre-planning is not always my wife's best.
This is going to be out before she gets back. You're in big trouble.
I don't need to tell her it's on, and podcast discovery is almost impossible. She'll never find it.
Is that a challenge? I think there's a great point buried in there about the Pareto principle, the 80-20 thing, about like, and so for me, sometimes I'll say to people, I'm willing to do almost anything. There is an asterisk there. I'm willing to do almost anything to be able to get to the part where I can press record. That's what I want to do, is the part between record and stop. That's where my passion really lies. But before I press record, I'm willing to do a lot. Like, I'm willing to spend like an hour doing research on every single guest, and I'm willing to like pay for the tools. And then I'm also willing to, like, I don't know, let's try all these random stuff no, the way I was doing it was the least worst way to do it. Keep doing that. And I think that leads me into, before we were talking, I asked you what came to mind around podcasting. The first thing you said after a little delay was work. And that led me to like poke a little bit at like why your podcast season 1 ended. Like, I know it ended in December of 21. So like 8 months ago. And we started talking about why you didn't restart. And you actually have the next 6 episodes are at some various level of existence. And this whole discussion of like work and like when to call it good enough, this brings me back to, so like, what would it take for you to buy into pressing publish on season 2?
Yeah, I'm almost entirely bought into publishing season 2. A couple of things happened during that time. One was I just got tired, and our business kind of took off, and I didn't have the time. And the longer I left it, the more difficult it was to come back to it. And then I had a fantastic idea. Like, this is blow your mind.
Oh, you have that problem too?
Amazing idea. I had this great idea, which was that my 20-year-old son, I'd teach him how to edit, and he could edit my podcast for me, because that's the bit I don't want to do. I like this bit. I don't like the bit after. I'd like the bit before, because I love to research. There's not data or information a piece of data or information I've never loved. Do you know what I mean? I love to do the bit before, and I love to be like here and present and now. I love that bit. The editing, not so much. And I thought, I'll get Fergus, our youngest, Fergus Tweddle. So I'll get him to do it. It took him 2 weeks. No, 3. I think it's 3. and and really all he'd done was remove the ums and ers. And I think he was halfway through doing that, and I showed him in Descript that you could remove it with one click, and he kind of wished he'd done a bit more looking into how the tool worked. And that really put me on a stall at that point. But then he also told me that it was actually good, that he enjoyed listening to it. He hadn't really heard me that way, and he thought that the episode was interesting. So I was kind of stuck. And I then have been helping other people with their podcasts, often to do with how to distribute them through Substack, or helping Lynn with her podcast. Or I'm also helping Scott Smith do an interesting podcast, which is called Intimate Fame. It's not out yet. But basically what he does is he takes a point in history. And previously he would have written a play. He's a playwright. But has made these one-person audio theatre plays about that moment in history. So we've done 3 episodes, which is the first season, which is about what's her name now? Wallace Simpson, who was married to the king who had to abdicate. So that's the first one. I'm now helping him edit one about Marilyn Monroe, which is. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, she calls him. She calls, she talks about Windsor and all that kind of stuff. So they have their own name for each other. So it's dramatized plays about just a sort of one point in history. And so the next one is Marilyn Monroe, which is that's the one I'm really focused on at the moment. It's Marilyn Monroe, and she did this 3-day photo shoot a little bit just before she died. With this incredibly famous photographer, and they just were together for 3 days, and nobody really knows what happens, but he's renowned for sleeping with his subjects, and renowned for drugs and bad behavior, but also the best kind of photography for Vogue. And so he's picked those things, and he's got this kind of thing plotted out. There's probably going to be James Dean and Elizabeth Taylor, and there's all these things, and it's kind of interesting because it's not that usual kind of. I'm used to host on mic or interview type
formats
stuff.
That you're more familiar with.
So now I'm having to do theme music and also sound effects, and making sure it all sort of times together. And so I'm sort of scratching my head for all of the old stuff I learned when I did video editing.
Video editing. If you think about, if you imagine season 2 being published, like let's say it's just going to be a 6-episode. Here you go. It's a miniseries. If you imagine that being published, what do you think that having it be published would add to your I'm going to say like your personal value of it. So there's a value in the creative work. There's a value in the hard work. There's a value in story. There's all these values about doing the thing. But what do you think having it be published would add for you?
I think this is probably what's stopped me from publishing. That sort of throwaway comment that I said about discovery is I'm very aware that I've published lots of things. I don't think I actually get much more from publishing it. There's stuff that is published that I've made. I made when I did video editing, we did 450 YouTube videos in a year, right? I've put stuff out there. I'm not worried about that, or there's not much more to be gained from that. What's really interesting for me now is how do you actually make sure it gets in front of the people that you want it to get in front of. That's not necessarily a large number of people, but it's the people that it would make a difference to. So at the moment, my storytelling world, our business, I want people to know that everyone's a storyteller, that our stories don't have to be structured in those 7 different structures, or pretty much everybody uses the hero's journey every time.
3 seconds, right?
Every time. Oh my gosh, is it the hero? That's why you can't find anything to watch on Netflix, because it's all the same story. It's all the same
wild
story.
Dead beat horse, right? Wild Dead beat horse.
Yeah, and then and what I got from those 6 episodes, and that's what I started to get when I started to re-listen, was, having a therapist talk about connection. And he had a very different point, but she said connection is about self-connection first. So we do everything that we can get so that we connect to ourselves first. And then when we connect to ourselves, then we can connect to others. And I think that's a really good point. The musician, because I did Chesney for one of them, and he had some revelations as well about the theme of what story does for him as music. Because he tells his story in music. And so, really, what I do want to get these out because I'm quite proud of them, and I think I got some really good interviews. But what I really want to know is how do I make it so that I can get it in front of people and people think it's worthy of listening to? That's the bit. Like, how do I get the people who really would gain most from it to find it and listen to it? And I have no idea on that. You got 3 seconds. Tell
question.
Me
how. No, I have no clue. That's a great question for everybody listening. All 3 people. Hi, Mom. For all people. But no, I think that's a great. Aside from a great place to end, that's also a really good observation. So, I think as much as I hate to say it every time, I think that's probably a good place for us to stop today. Mark, it was a pleasure to get a chance to talk to you one-on-one. We've been in a couple of calls. We've crossed a little bit here and there, but it was everything I hoped it would be to get a chance to talk for 20 minutes. So thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. It's fun to spend this time with you.